Okay, so a bunch of really cool things happened in this chapter, and some of them brought back kind of memories for me. They go and they capture the antelopes, and the boys decide, hey, why not, instead of capturing the antelopes, we chase them over to our side of the island? Which is kind of a great idea because, antelopes are the sort of thing, it goes along with the wildebeest and the buffalo and the such that they find over there. And they're easy enough to catch and they're easy enough to take care of. So the boys chase the antelopes across down the river through the gap, and the antelope don't want to go through the gap, which is kind of understandable because they're kind of being funneled in, and people and animals don't like being funneled in because they know it's a trap, and it is kind of a trap, but in this case the trap is open ended. And then the boys took a line, strung it across, and they put feathers and other things on it to make noise and move and whatever and scare off the animals. Now, they referred to the people as Hottentots who gave them this idea. Now, Hottentot is a word used to describe some tribes in Africa that's offensive now, but this is the term that was used then. The proper name for the tribe is the Tutsi, and they are in southern Africa, and they're just one of the tribes in southern Africa. Anyway, so this is something that people do in Africa to keep the antelope caged in. If you don't have a lot of high technology like barbed wire fences, you do what you can do. And it's amazing what you can do with just a little bit of ingenuity. This is string and feathers, and it's enough to keep out the animals. It's enough to keep out the antelope because they see the movement and, they're worried and afraid of it. The Vuvuzela is a musical instrument of sorts that is just this loud, incredibly loud. It just makes a lot of noise. It's like this buzzing sound, and it's like one pitch, and it's insanely loud. And I mean, that's what it's known for. Soccer fans over in Africa play it as part of their chants and things, and so it's called the vuvuzela. But the thing is that this was invented in Africa to keep elephants away. And because the thing is loud, I mean, it's like 80, 90 decibels. I mean, it's just like painfully loud. So it's painfully loud, but the thing is that the pitch of the instrument, it plays one note. The vuvuzela has one note, and it plays it loud. So this is a one-trick pony. It does one thing, but it does it really, really well. Anyway, the pitch of the vuvuzela is very much like the buzz of bees. And elephants are scared of bees. Because if you were to think about it, you'd have the elephants with the big ears, and the bees would get in the ears and all sorts of. So elephants are scared of bees, and they will avoid them if they can. So one guy with the vuvuzela can keep acres of land clear from elephants. Oh, the elephants are coming. Gone. Now, many, many years ago, we were at the Boy Scout Jamboree. Lolly, me, your dad, we were at the Boy Scout Jamboree, and it was right after South Africa had the World Cup. So there were a couple of kids there who had vuvuzelas, and they were playing them. And you could hear the kids for miles. No, maybe not quite miles, but you could hear them like long, long way. And one time we were out walking because at the Jamboree you walk everywhere. And we were walking from one place to another, and we heard the vuvuzelas, and then all of a sudden we heard something drowning out the sound. So here you had something coming towards us that was louder than the vuvuzelas, and that was the Scottish Highland pipes. And there was a guy with this, and he was blowing out louder than the 10 kids with the vuvuzelas. I was like, that is so awesome. But anyway, that's about herding. That's I don't know. Oh, that's the antelope and the feathers and the boy. That was a digression. Anyway, The whole thing reminded me a lot of the old westerns and cattle rustling. And so back in the old west, you had all of this open rangeland, and you had, it was just kind of open land, and everyone had their herd of cattle, and they moved them around from place to place because you can't keep the cows in one place because they'll tear up the ground and they'll eat all the grass and they'll bare the earth. But if you move the cows around, then the cows end up fertilizing the earth and turning it over. And so everything grows better if you keep this large herd moving around. So what everyone did was they had their herd of cows and they moved them around from place to place. And they had the cowboys, and the cowboys would move around with the horses. And I mean, this is done, lots of places. I was going to say in South America, the cowboys are caballeros, Spanish word for cowboy, where we get cavalry from. Caballeros, cavalry. Anyway, move the cows around. Cowboys move the cows around. But what would happen is that there were people who were greedy and bad, and what they would do is they'd come up in the middle of the night and they'd make a whole bunch of noise, and they would drive off other people's cattle and take them. And this was called cattle rustling, and people got killed and hung for this. But anyway, so it reminded me a lot of cattle rustling, because here they are, they're driving the animals away to someplace they don't want to do. Follow the bird to the honey. Honey is great stuff, and made a drink like English mead. So mead is a drink made from fermented honey. Now, he didn't sit around and let this ferment. He just mixed the honey with spices and water. And so that's, a pretty tasty drink. It's kind of like soda without the bubbles. But that's kind of how you make mead. Now, mead is made like beer and wine, and it's made like beer and wine. If you start out with grain and you mix in hops, you get beer. If you start with fruit, you get wine. If you start with honey, you get mead. And it's just the yeast breaking down the sugars into alcohol, and the extra flavors of everything that's not sugar affects how it tastes. So the wine has the taste of the grapes. The beer has the taste of the barley and the hops, or the rye or the wheat or whatever you ferment into it. And mead has the taste of honey. Now, you may just think of honey as sweet, but honey has a flavor from whatever the bees made the honey from. So, if the bees feed on orange blossoms, the honey tastes like oranges. If they feed on almonds, it tastes like almonds. If they feed on hydrangeas, it poisons you and you die. Well, you don't necessarily die, but you get sick. But anyway, so that's why they're very careful about what bees eat. But anyway, if it feeds on oranges, it tastes like oranges. If it feeds like almonds, it tastes like almonds. If it feeds on wildflowers, you have this very floral taste. So you can get different honey that tastes like different things. It's different colors too. Buckwheat honey is a dark color. Buckwheat is a type of grain. So they made mead, and I've tried making mead before, and it's turned out okay. So let's see. Bear paws, actually a thing that people eat. I have a cookbook that I got from my mom called The Joy of Cooking, which your Lolly hates because it says, okay, this recipe. And the recipe is incredibly brief, and quite often there's like see the sauce blah from page whatever. So it's like, okay, I'm going to make fettuccine alfredo. It's like, see bechamel sauce. So you go to bechamel sauce. And it's like, see roux. And so you're like 5 steps deep to make a simple dish. But if you know how to make a roux, you know how to make a bechamel sauce, and you just open it up and you see fettuccine alfredo, it's like, okay, bechamel sauce, cheese, you're done. So, and it actually has a recipe for bear in there. I've never cooked bear. I've known people who have eaten bear. I know people who have hunted bear. Bear has an issue. As I've constantly said, things taste like what they eat. So alligators eat fish and they taste like fish. If the bear eats trash, it's going to taste like trash, which is just because it's eating trash. If the bear is eating fish, it probably tastes pretty good. Anyway, so let's see. Followed the honeybird, crossed the desert. Ostrich eggs. They caught ostrich eggs. And the father kept them on the stove and kept them warm. Now, when I was in kindergarten, so I was 4 or 5 years old, our kindergarten went on a field trip to a chicken hatchery. And at the chicken hatchery, we got an incubator and eggs that were fertilized. So we had this incubator, and it sat in our kindergarten class, and it was in there for a few weeks, however long it takes to hatch eggs. I mean, I can't remember how long it takes. I was 4 or 5. And it's like you put an X on the egg because the mother chickens, and I'm assuming mother ostriches do this because the same physics applies, turn over the eggs every day. So a mother chicken takes an egg and turns it over every day. And if you don't turn the eggs over every day, the chickens develop weird because they sink down against one side of the egg. And they just kind of have a limp or a weird shaped feather or whatever. So you turn the eggs over every day. And anyway, so we had this incubator, and we would have the eggs turned over every day, and somebody would get to do it. And you'd have to be very careful and keep it warm. And one day, there were 2 light bulbs in the incubator, and they kept it warm. And one day, one of the light bulbs went out, and they replaced the light bulb, but we knew that there were, that the light bulb went out, so things might not have been good. And so a few weeks, a little bit more time went by, and we saw the eggs start to hatch, and we watched the egg started to hatch. There was one egg that hatched. It was directly under the bulb that didn't burn out. So all of the other chickens froze, or didn't freeze, but they were too cold and they didn't survive. And we called it Birdie the early bird, because right around that time, McDonald's was doing this promotion of their Egg McMuffin. They just started serving breakfast, just started doing breakfast, and that tells you how long ago this was. And there was Birdie the early bird was their mascot for that. Just like they had Grimace, just like they had Ronald McDonald and the Hamburglar and all of these other characters. So, this is 70s pop culture references here. Birdie the early bird. So that's what we called the one that hatched, but it was the only one who survived. So we were all like downers. We were like, come on, they're going to hatch, right? No. No. They didn't hatch. It was sad. And, we cried, but we had the one chicken. It grew, and I don't know what happened to it at the end of the school year, but it went away. So let's see. Honey, eggs, ostrich eggs. And so I don't know if he turned them over, but he kept them warm on the stove. And you have to be really careful with that, because it's the type of thing that's like, if it's too warm, if it's not warm enough, if it's too warm, it dies. If it's not warm enough, it dies. So you have to be very careful. So he's like insulation, it's stove. And then let's see. He made a whole bunch of stuff. He made porcelain cups. And what he did to make the porcelain is something called slip casting, where you take a form of gypsum, which is like number 2 hardness. As I said, talc was 1, gypsum's like number 2. So gypsum's one of those things that you can carve easily. And so what he did was he carves out the shape, and then he pours a mixture of the clay into it. So this is a really, really fine clay, and it's mixed with water, and it just sort of pours. And it lines up against the shape of the cup. And because the gypsum is porous, The gypsum absorbs the water, so the gypsum absorbs the water out of the silt. Out of the silt, out of the clay. So the water pulls out of the clay into the gypsum, and it dries out, and then you bake that, and it dries a little bit more, and then you fire that in the kiln, and then the crystals reform and stuff, and it hardens and becomes baked clay. And so really fine porcelain is almost transparent. You can see light through it. And he didn't quite get it that good, which is to be expected because that's hard and that takes like actual skill. Then let's see. He made hats. Oh, rabbits. They captured rabbits. And the dad was like, no, if you bring those rabbits over to our side of the island, they're just going to go wild and we'll never see the end of them. And this was surprisingly prescient. Australia has a rabbit problem. Rabbits were introduced. Rabbits were introduced into Australia after. I'm pretty sure it was after this book was written. Somebody decided, hey, I'm going to farm rabbits. And so he got a rabbit farm. And then some of the rabbits escaped. And now Australia is overrun by rabbits. And they can't get rid of them. Because they're just so many. And nothing in Australia can eat them fast enough. I mean, yeah, there's some things that eat them, but nothing really went after them. And they just spread and spread and spread. And so Australia ended up making a fence. So there's this big fence that runs across Australia. And it's like rabbits on one side, everything else on the other. And so, yeah, rabbits are just wild. And the dad was like, no, you are not releasing them here. And one of the kids was like, island. And like, dad was like, that works. So they have baby antelope on one island, rabbits on the other. And so if they need a fall back, they can fall back and eat rabbit. And rabbit tastes good. Rabbit tastes like chicken. Tastes like chicken. Well, rabbits eat grass and whatever. Chicken. Anyway. So rabbits taste pretty good. Kind of a leaner meat, but it's a very tasty meat. So the hat. So the dad made hats. Now, hats back in the day are made from felt or they were made from hides. And so you often had hats made out of beaver. Because beaver has a very shiny, tight fur. And so you would have these hats, and you have the classic top hat, which was actually usually made from beaver fur. So if you would just see it, you would see all of these little hairs. But anyway, or as I said, they're also made from felt. Now, through the looking glass, Alice meets the Mad Hatter. And hatters, people who made hats, were often insane. Because one of the things that they did, one of the ways that they treated the fabric was with mercury. And mercury is poisonous, and so these people would end up with a lot of mercury in their system, and it gives them the shakes, and it gives them hallucinations, and generally bad stuff. But the dad didn't have any mercury to make the hat, so he just kind of pressed it and did it, and it was okay. The type of hat he described is, he called it a Swiss hat. It's probably a Tyrolean hat. It's Tyrol is an area of Austria, Switzerland, Germany, and Italy. So you have this area that was like, okay, this is Tyrol. And then different empires conquered it, and the countries split up, and Holy Roman, and all of this stuff. These different sections eventually formed into Austria or Italy or Switzerland or Germany. Tyrol was broken up. Anyway, so a Tyrolean hat kind of comes round in the front, comes up to a little bit of the point on the head, often has a brush or feather at the side. So it's a fancy looking hat. Rope around the outside, green or red is a common color. So, he decided, hey, I have cochineal, I have red food coloring. I'm going to make a hat with red food coloring. And so he made a hat. And so it's Tyrolean hat. Riding an ostrich, that's actually kind of a thing. It's ostriches, yeah, they run fast, but they don't carry weight well. So typically it's like little kids ride on it and then they get hurt, and it's the results of ostrich races usually are not good. But yeah, people can ride on ostriches, and the blinker system is kind of weird, and so it's one of those things where he has the controls backwards, which is something that is kind of difficult. But because usually it's like you pull on the reins to stop the horse, or you pull on the bridle to stop the ox. No, in this case, you pull on the straps for the ostrich, and the eyes open up, and the ostrich goes, "Run!" And it's a common thing for putting birds to sleep that you cover the light. You just cover them, and then they just get quiet. People who keep parrots often have like a cover for them, because if they want to go to bed, and the parrots are going to be up and making noise, but they won't make noise if it's pitch black. So what you do is you cover it up, and the parrots are like, it's pitch black, I can't see anything, could be a snake coming to get me, I'm just going to be quiet. So covering birds' eyes is a common way to get them to be quiet and calm them down. And the gizzard. So he said that the ostrich was eating rocks to help digest the food. And so birds don't have teeth usually. There's an old saying, rare as hen's teeth, which means it doesn't occur. Most birds actually have a gene that makes teeth, but it's turned off and it's left over from dinosaurs. But occasionally it accidentally gets turned back on. So every 100,000 chickens or every million chickens or some really small number of chickens will occasionally have a tooth. So when you say rare as hen's teeth, it means it's not going to happen, but it does occasionally happen. You do occasionally see a hen with teeth. Anyway, so birds don't have teeth. And because birds don't have teeth, they can't really chew their food. Because they don't chew their food, they just swallow it whole. So you have this whole big mass of food in their stomach. And the way the birds get around this is they have something called a gizzard. And a gizzard is kind of like a second stomach. And the gizzard they swallow rocks. And so what they do is they swallow rocks, and the rocks bang up the food. So the rocks bang up the food, so the bones, the skin, everything gets crushed up by the rocks banging around inside of the gizzard. And then it moves on to the stomach, where it's chemically digested. But birds have to swallow rocks in order for the gizzard to work. So you often see them swallowing pebbles or whatever, and then the rocks eventually break down to the point where they become too small and then pass through. But birds swallow rocks in order to chew stuff, and so their ostrich was swallowing gravel. And the mom called out something very important. They need to find iron, because they don't have a way to replace anything of iron. The kid was like, just feed them a couple of 10-penny nails. It's like, dude, 10-penny nails are not going to last forever. They only brought so many with them. They may have had a cask with 100 pounds of 10-penny nails, but they use a pound here, a pound there. They build this, build that, build the other thing. All of a sudden, no more nails, and they'll start having to pull things apart. And nails rust. So the mom was right. They need to find some iron. Or maybe they can find some tin and copper and make bronze. Yeah, tin and copper and make bronze. But iron would be good. Iron would be useful.